After this video lecture, students will be able to identify electron domain in molecular geometries for specific compounds from their Lewis diagrams. And students will also be able to identify the correct bond angles associated with specific molecular geometries. So VSEPR theory, or valence shell electron pair repulsion theory, basically says that the electrons around a central atom are going to orient themselves so that the repulsive forces are minimized. And so in order for repulsive forces to be minimized, things that are similarly charged, and in this case electrons, are going to put themselves in as far a distance as possible around that central atom. And basically this orientation, or VSEPR theory, is what leads to the shapes that molecules have. So VSEPR theory is dictated heavily by a concept called electron domains. And basically these are where electron densities reside on the central atom. And there's two types of electron domains. There's bonding pair domains and lone pair domains. And the bonding pair domains, you can see them in this molecule right here. They are the domains in which electrons are shared between two atoms in a molecule. The lone pair domains consist of basically electrons that are not involved in the bonding process. So a lone pair, a radical, or single electron, as it can be referred to. Now, basically the number of these domains is going to dictate your shape. And we'll discuss that more thoroughly. But before we move into that, I do want to mention that the lone pairs, okay, these types of domains here, take up more space on this central atom. Okay, so what we can think of it, or how we can think of it, is that the lone pairs are going to take up more space or repel the bonding pairs more strongly in the molecular shape. Now, when we're actually determining molecular shape, the first thing that we're going to need to do is draw the correct Lewis dot structure. At this point, I assume everybody's proficient. The next thing that we do is we look at basically those electronic domains, or those pairs, whether they're in a bonding pair or a non-bonding pair. We basically count all those up. And then what we do is we're going to compare the number of bonding pairs to the number of non-bonding pairs, or lone pairs, and subsequently decide on the shape. And the shape dictates what type of bond angles you have, and a slew of other things. So you guys are going to need to know the shapes and their bonding angles, but we're going to look at how we go about getting each of these. So as I said earlier, basically the number of electron domains are going to affect the bonding that you have. In addition, the types of non-bonding domains, or excuse me, the types of electron domains that you have are going to dictate the overall shape of your molecule. So we have our Lewis structures all around here. So assuming that we can write the correct Lewis structure, we have carbon dioxide here. In this situation, when I look at carbon dioxide, it has 2 atoms attached to it. Both of them are attached by double bonds, and there are no lone pairs around this atom. Okay, so what we would say is that we have a total number of 2 electron domains around carbon. Those domains are both bonding domains. Now, this leads us to something called electron domain geometry. Okay, so when we're just counting up the total number of electron domains, the electron domain geometry is basically going to tell us the general overall potential shape. Now, when we get to molecular geometry, we have to start considering non-bonding domain. So typically when questions are asking you for the shape of the molecule, they're asking for molecular geometry. So you are going to count up all the electron domains, but you must also consider the types of domains that you have. So in this case, the carbon is surrounded by 2 electron domains, both of which are bonding domains. There are no non-bonding domains, so that gives us a linear geometry. And a linear geometry is going to give us a bond angle of 180 degrees. Okay, so we'll look at how the electron domain geometry comes into effect in a little more important way over the next several examples. So let's go ahead and let's look at this example here. So BF3, we draw the Lewis dot structures. Okay, boron has 1, 2, 3 electron domains surrounding it. Okay, so the electron domain geometry is going to be trigonal planar. Okay, so the reason why it's trigonal planar is because basically you have this triangle shape and all of the atoms are in the same plane. So all of these atoms, when we're looking at them, can be looked at as being in the plane of the board. Okay, now since there are no non-bonding domains on the central boron atom, trigonal planar is also going to be your molecular geometry, so your actual shape of your molecule. And the bond angles associated with a trigonal planar shape is 120 degrees. Okay, so each one of these are the same. Okay, now let's go ahead and let's look at this next example below. So, okay, NO2 minus, we've drawn our Lewis structure for this ion. Okay, if we look at the central atom, notice there's a double bond here, so that's one electron domain. Okay, there's another bond here that's two electron domains, and there's a lone pair. Okay, so there's a total of 3 electron domains. So the electron geometry, okay, the basic overall geometry for this molecule, for the electron domain geometry is trigonal planar. Okay, however, in order to get the actual shape of the molecule, we have to also consider what types of domains exist on that central atom. So in this situation, we have 2 bonding domains, okay, one from the double bond, one from the single bond, okay, and we also have a single non-bonding domain. Okay, so this non-bonding domain is going to affect the overall shape of the molecule. So you're not going to get trigonal planar, okay, like we did with this example above. We're going to get a different shape. Okay, and that shape is called the bent shape. Okay, so basically what ends up happening is, remember the lone pair domains, they take up more space on the atom. Okay, so they're going to alter the shape of the molecule. We don't have 3 bonding structures, we only have this set here, so this gives us this kind of bent or V-looking shape here. Right, so the shape that we have is bent. Bent molecules have a bonding angle that is actually slightly less than 120 degrees. And the reason why it's slightly less is because the lone pair, or the non-bonding domain, takes up more space on that central atom. Okay, so we can continue through on to the next example. Okay, so if we look at CH4, we look at methane here. Okay, we have carbon as our central atom. There's 1, 2, 3, 4 groups around it. Okay, so that gives us 4 electron domains. Our electron domain geometry will be tetrahedral. Our number of bonding domains is 4. Our number of non-bonding domains is 0. So the shape that we're going to obtain here is a tetrahedral molecule. So notice the electron domain geometry and the molecular geometry continue to match as long as there are no non-bonding domains. Okay, so for a tetrahedral molecule, the bond angles are all 109.5 degrees, right? And you subsequently get this shape for the molecule. Now, if we continue in that same vein, okay, if we go ahead and we look at NH3, right? In this situation, we have 1, 2, 3, 4 groups around the central atom, so we have the same number of electron domains as the previous example. However, in this case, when we go to look at our non-bonding domains, okay, we have 1. Right? So we have 3 bonding domains and a single non-bonding domain. So that is going to affect the overall molecular geometry, or the actual shape of the molecule. So in this case, instead of a tetrahedral shape, we have trigonal pyramidal. So what has happened is we still have this kind of toadstool shape that we saw with the tetrahedral. You can see it here on the trigonal pyramidal molecule. But in this case, instead of having another bonding set here, we have a lone pair. Okay, so instead of having the tetrahedral shape, we now have basically a trigonal pyramidal. So what we actually have here is basically these 3 points, which give us the trigonal portion. And the fact that this central atom is elevated basically leads to the pyramidal aspect. Okay, so in terms of bond angle, as we would anticipate, okay, the bond angle here is going to be less than 109.5. Okay, and that's because, remember, the lone pair, okay, or the non-bonding domains, they take up more space on the atom surface than bonding pairs. Okay, and we can take this even a step further. If we go ahead and we look at this example, we have H2O, or a water molecule here. If we count up the number of electron domains, right? We have 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, so there's a total of 4 domains. 2 of them are bonding, okay, between the hydrogen and the oxygen, and 2 of them are non-bonding. So in this case, we still have an electron domain geometry that's associated with the tetrahedral shape. However, in this case, we now have 2 sets of lone pairs. Okay, so in this case, we are now back to the bent shape, because once again, we have this kind of V-looking shape here, right? Now, our bonding angle here, because I now have 2 sets of non-bonding domains, is going to be much less than what it would have normally been, so 109.5 degrees, right? So notice that your bonding angles, as you add those lone pairs, are getting smaller and smaller, okay, which we would anticipate based on the understanding that the lone pairs take up more space on the central atom. Okay, so let's go ahead and move on to a little bit more complicated molecules. All right, PCl5, we're going to have 5 chlorines bonded to a central atom. Okay, no lone pairs. So this gives us a total number of 5 electron domains and a basic shape of trigonal bipyramidal. So in this case, we have an equatorial bonding area. So this is corresponding to these 3 bonds that you see over here. Okay, and basically an axial bonding set, which corresponds to these 2 bonds here within the molecule. Okay, so in this case, PCl5, we have 5 bonding domains, no non-bonding domains. So the molecular shape is going to match the electron domain geometry, which is the trigonal bipyramidal. And in the trigonal bipyramidal situation, okay, the bonding that's occurring in the axial position have a bond angle of 120 degrees. So that's occurring, okay, in that equatorial setting, okay. On the other hand, okay, we also have another set of bonding that's occurring in this axial position. And in this situation, we have a bond angle of 90 degrees, okay. So these are the bonds that we're dealing with in situations where we have that trigonal bipyramidal shape. Now, if we look at SF4, when we do that Lewis dot structure, we end up with 4 bonding pairs, okay, and a lone pair, right? So we have a total of 5 electron domains, okay, 4 of which are bonding, 1 of which is non-bonding. So in this case, we end up with a seesaw shape, okay. You're going to have a decreased bond angle, so the 120 is, or 120 degrees in that axial position is now going to be made slightly smaller, okay, as well as the 90 degree is going to be slightly smaller than what we would have anticipated in the past. Okay, so ClF3, if we draw that Lewis structure, we get a shape called a T-shaped. We have 3 bonding pairs in this case, 2 non-bonding pairs, okay, and that basically leads us to have this T-shape that you see here. In this case, the bonding angles are 90 degrees. Okay, and our last example here, XEF2. Okay, our bonding domains, we have 2 of them. Okay, and our non-bonding domains are 3. So in this situation, since we only have 2 bonds present and all of the electron lone pairs are in the axial position because that's what allows them to be farthest apart, we end up with this linear shape and subsequently a completely new bond angle of 180 degrees. So as you can see, once again, as we progress down within a specific number of electron domains, so in this case 5, our bond angles that we originally have are going to get smaller and smaller and eventually potentially morph into something very, very different. So the last shape, or the last molecular geometry that we're going to be looking at is the octahedral shape. So in terms of an octahedral molecule, such as SF6, you draw that Lewis structure, you have 6 electron domains around that central atom. Okay, that gives us this octahedral shape. Basically, we have 4 bonding locations in the equatorial position, and then 2 in the axial position. So when I have 6 bonding domains and 0 non-bonding domains, my molecular geometry is going to match the electron domain geometry, which is octahedral. And in the octahedral geometry, basically everything is at 90-degree angles. Okay, so everything's 90 degrees C. Excuse me, 90 degrees, not 90 degrees C. And so just like we did last time, if we continue down the list, okay, and look at other examples, In this case, BRF5, it has 5 bonding domains and 1 non-bonding domain. In this case, we get what's called a square pyramidal. Okay, so remember these are all in that equatorial position. The axial position here stays present, so this gives us kind of a square-shaped pyramid. Okay, and if we continue down and we look at an example like XEF4, where we have 4 bonding domains and 2 non-bonding domains, we end up with basically this bonding set within the equatorial positions, and we subsequently get a square planar shape. So in terms of this square pyramid and the square planar shapes, you know, these aren't ones we see quite as frequently as some of the other examples we've talked about, but they do show up, so you want to be familiar with them. So here's a nice little diagram that kind of shows all of the geometries that you can expect depending on the type of groups that are, or the number of groups that are around it, and the subsequent corresponding lone pairs. And their basic bond angles, you can take a look at each of those and kind of get an idea of what's anticipated for each of the different bonding types with the specific examples that we talked about before. So here's a nice little example. It shows the progression. So this would be the number of electron domains, so 4. Okay, so 4 bonding electron domains correspond to the basic electron domain geometry of tetrahedral shape. Okay, if there are in fact no lone pairs, you get this tetrahedral molecular shape. If there's a single lone pair, you get a trigonal pyramid, okay, or trigonal pyramidal. Okay, and in that same thought process, if there's 4 groups around and 2 of them are non-bonding or lone pairs, you end up with the bent or angular shape, and you get the subsequent bond angle changes depending on how many lone pairs you have on that central atom. So this is just a nice overview of kind of what we talked about in the last several slides. So let's go ahead and let's just do a quick example of how we'd analyze the shape of a specific molecule, or kind of what we would consider in that process. Okay, so if we go ahead and we look at, I don't know, let's look at this molecule. Okay, all right, so what we would do, we count up all our valence electrons, put the least electronegative in the middle, distributed all of our electrons after bonding, do all the stuff we've been doing for the past little bit here. Okay, and we would basically end up with this structure. Okay, all right, so determine the shape of this molecule. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to look at the central atom, and I'm going to count the number of groups around that central atom. So in this case, we have 1, 2, 3, 4 groups. Okay, so I have 4 groups. Okay, 4 groups. Okay, and then once I figure out the 4 groups, I need to figure out what electron domain geometry this would belong to. Okay, so this would belong to the tetrahedral group. Okay, so now before I can determine the final shape or the molecular geometry, I have to consider what type of electron groups I have around the central atom. So this carbon has all bonding groups around that central atom. So because they're all bonding groups, the electron domain geometry is going to match, okay, the molecular geometry. Okay, so tetrahedral is the shape of this molecule. Now, in terms of tetrahedral shape, the bond angles are going to be 109.5 degrees, right? And that's going to be true for all the bond angles within that atom. So how do I know this stuff? What am I doing? Well, when I was learning, I grabbed that chart that I showed you guys a few slides back and basically, you know, counted up the groups, compared the number of non-bonding groups to the number of bonding groups versus the total number of electron domains. And that led me to my shape and the subsequent angles. So basically there is a degree of memorization that's occurring here. However, if you learn them sequentially, okay, so if you look at the tetrahedral shapes and then look at the potential offshoots based on, you know, a molecule like something like this, okay, comparing this to this, right, these are both in the tetrahedral electron domain geometry group. However, the actual molecular geometry is going to be different because there is a lone pair here. So in this situation, I can go from one shape to another based on my understanding of the initial tetrahedral orientation. So in this case, right here, instead of having a tetrahedral shape, I'm actually going to, this molecule is actually going to have a trigonopyramidal shape. Okay, and I know my bond angles because it's of the fact that it's belonging to the tetrahedral family. I know that these will be somewhere within the vicinity of 109.5, but I know that they're going to be less than 109.5 because this lone pair takes up more space on that central atom. Okay, so when you guys are memorizing these and getting used to the bond angles, I want you to first look at the main overall group's shape, okay, how it looks, the bond angles associated with it, and then basically work your way down through the other geometries that can come from having four groups around that central atom.